Thank you for joining this session today. Welcome and thank you for joining. We are very excited to have you here as part of our Pathlock Innovation Series. We have several sessions coming up still for the next few days. And if you would like to join those sessions, I'm going to put a link here in the chat and you can go ahead and register for those. Tomorrow, we have our PeopleSoft Innovation Day, and then on Thursday, we have our Oracle Innovation Day. Our session right now is with Alan Cutting, Senior Solution Architect here at Pathlock, and he will be his title of his webinar is Should You Fix Your SAP S/4HANA Security Risks Before, During, or After Going Live? And you'll hear more from him in just a minute. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I'm the Global Webinar Manager here at Pathlock. And before we go any further, I just have a few housekeeping items. To prevent background noise, everyone is on mute. And if you have any questions, we are going to have a Q&A session following Alan's presentation, and there should be a question box that you can enter your questions on your control panel. So please enter any questions there, and we will answer them at the end of the event. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Alan.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. Today, looking at the agenda, we're going to do an introduction. We're going to look at role risk redesigns in S/4HANA, and then we'll go into the main topic of should you fix your risk before, during, or after go live. And finally, we're going to look at a tool of Pathlock's called Authorization Architect and how that can help you. I'm Alan Cutting. I've been with Pathlock for a couple of years. I've got over 25 years experience with SAP security and audit support. And during that time, I've done more SAP and GRC implementations than I can count, and several Security Weaver implementations before I actually joined Security Weaver, which is now part of Pathlock. I'm certified both as a security professional and as a systems auditor. As you may know, earlier this year, Pathlock, Pathlock, which was previously Greenlight, merged with 4 other industry players: Apcian, CSI Tools, Security Weaver, and SAST. And each of these companies brought some really strong portfolios to the party. Now we have a very complete security line, not only in GRC, but in data security. We've got transaction monitoring, data masking, dynamic authorizations. We've got application security and code scanning. So we've got a much fuller menu of areas that we can help you with now as Pathlock. We've got over 1,000 customers worldwide, over 500 employees, and these are a few of the just a few of the customers, because there are a lot of them. So, role risk and redesigns. Why the need to periodically revise security roles? Several reasons. One may be that your auditor has informed you that you've got, massive security segregation of duties, risk in the current roles, and the current role structure might make SOD mitigation difficult. There may have been business changes, either constant organizational changes that have changed the world or changed how your company is in a big way since the roles were designed. Might be mergers or acquisitions or corporate spinoffs. Some of the big projects I've been on in the last few years have involved either mergers or spinoffs, and the old roles might not be the most suitable, or they may have a lot of access, related to a company you've spun off that you don't want to have that access anymore. So it may seem like this is a good time for a role redesign. It might be that your role structure is not documented very well over the years, and now it's difficult to understand. You bring in new people, and it's hard for them to understand just how the roles are supposed to work and how they're supposed to be assigned. There might be a lot of duplication between roles, which also can make it difficult to decide on which role to assign to someone. If a transaction is in a bunch of different roles, it might make that hard. You may have the feeling that you've got a lot of unused transactions in the roles. This will become really important doing a role redesign because you should be testing your transactions. There are some studies that suggest that a third to a half of the transactions in most roles are not being used. And so they're not being used, why not take them out and not have to test them? And finally, license optimization. You might want to make some changes to the roles just to minimize where you fall on the license list for each user, and maybe you can bring down your licensing costs. So typical role redesign barriers, time is a big one. It takes time to do it right on a role redesign. It involves usually a lot of meetings with departments to find out what issues they're having with the current roles and what access they believe that their users should have. And a lot of times, it seems funny, but the departments don't really know on the transactions, or the users don't know exactly what they need. And if you ask them, like, well, do you need this? The answer is always yes. So they'll get a lot more than what they really need. You may find out that you went off the wrong path and you have to come back and redo a department or two. There's costs associated with that time, of course. You might have to pay overtime for when the users are taken out of their normal work and they have to do testing. You may have to pay external consultants for the role redesign work. It's costly, so that's another hindrance. Maybe that you're not sure you've got the skills in-house to do a role redesign project. A lot of companies now have outsourced their security and to pretty much the lowest bidder, and they're basically maintenance shops. They keep the operation running, they add new users, delete old users, and do some role maintenance work, but they may not have kept up on where the technology is as far as the roles or what's different in S4HANA, that type thing. The risk associated with a role redesign is that first off, it could just take longer than you think, and that could be a problem. But if you get into production and the roles don't work as advertised, then suddenly you've got a lot of people who can't do their jobs, and it hits the factory floor, and it's a massive fire drill. And finally, there's the experience on previous projects. It may be that you've got people that have worked on these before and it wasn't a pleasant experience, and a role redesign project is the last thing they really want to do again. You don't want to be like the ship that's trying to claw its way off a lee shore and not have it happen again. So those are all reasons why companies avoid role redesigns until it's just really necessary. S4HANA has some of its own challenges when you're moving to it. As you probably know, S4HANA is a major rewrite in the way SAP does business processes. Massive simplifications, they call them, in processes and data models. They change the way that the information flows. It's got a huge impact on security. Their goal is to reduce the need for custom programs. So you may have new functionality that you're implementing to replace custom programs, and so you've got your obsolete transactions and functionality from the custom T codes, and you've got new stuff coming in. There's an impact to the transactions because a great deal of the transactions from ECC are going away with S4HANA. They're being replaced with something different. So that's a big concern. Excuse me. Also, with the implementation of Fiori tiles, that's a big change to security, and that replaces a lot of transactions. Finally, a lot of, at least the integrators, are really pushing for rapid migrations. And so instead of maybe having 2 years, let's say, to migrate to S4HANA and what seems like lots of time to sort all this out, you may have someone that has set a very aggressive time schedule, like we're gonna do this in 6 months, and they're looking at what it takes for the hardware and different things to do it, running some conversions and stuff, but they didn't talk to security before they asked about that. So you may have some very aggressive milestones that you're dealing with. Factors affecting when you should do the security work. Of course, there's your company size. How many landscapes do you have? How many roles do you have? A few thousand roles, or do you have 100,000 roles? We've got companies that you count their derived roles. Customers, they've got millions of roles. So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot to tackle if you were to try to do it during the course of a project. What is the state of your current roles? Are they pretty clean of SODs? Are there major problems, or do you think you've kept up with it pretty well and you're ready just to tackle the S4HANA changes? Do you have the right skill sets to get all this done during the course of a project, or do you need more time, basically? Are you doing a big bang migration? Are you doing everything at once, or are you like moving one department at a time into S4 and then 6 months later doing another department? We talked about project duration already. And then there's cost. An earlier start might be more expensive, and so like I naturally would tend to want to start early. There may be voices in the company that don't want to start early just because they feel it's going to cost more. So those are all factors weighing on the timing. So what's the answer? When should you fix your risk? Well, to hedge it just a little bit, I think that for analysis and planning, you should definitely start those before the project begins. Analyze your current role situation, talk to the departments, document what concerns they have with the roles, talk with audit. You probably have access to SOD reports since you probably are the ones that run them, but talk with audit, see what their biggest concerns are. Get input from the stakeholders, write down the goals of the role redesign so that it doesn't get lost 6 months down the way of what are we really doing here and what are we trying to fix. Agree with your stakeholders on the role strategy, and begin your planning and scoping. What's going to be in scope and what are you going to defer until after you've gone live. Get at least a high level project plan done and mapped out of how you're going to tackle it. And if you've got shortages in knowledge, start getting some of the S4HANA training in and the Fiori training and get that knocked out a little bit early. Then before the S4HANA project starts, unless you've got a small landscape or you're really, really clean, we recommend that you start the cleanup and role redesign work before you start the S4HANA project itself. Implement the role strategy that you did in the previous phase, do the role cleanups, get rid of the unneeded transactions, the stuff that nobody's using or the stuff that is now obsolete. Address your SOD risk at this time before the stuff is all in production. Do your testing and at least start on the Fiori work. That can be started even while you're on ECC. And then just as I know, we have a tool called Authorization Architect that can help reduce the time spent on this phase and reduce the pain as well. Then during the S4 project itself, as soon as you've got the S4HANA development box available, you can start working on the S/4HANA specific issues, the transition to new transactions, in new processes and the new tables. There may be a lot of table work involved in some of the security because tables have changed. So table permissions, what permissions people got access to is going to change. You will have to deal with project team security issues. We always forget that that's going on during a project and make plans without putting that in, but that's actually takes up a great deal of your time during the project. You can be working on implementing the Fiori functionality and the catalogs and services that are involved for that. Testing in S/4HANA, presumably once you've got your QA box up, you can be testing. And the time frame may be, a limited time, so of the project itself. So you'll be glad that you got the head start, and you're still going to probably have to work your buns off to get it done. And again, Authorization Architect can help out on that. If you do all this at go live, you should mainly have deferred issues to deal with, some fine tuning. It will depend on how well you've tested. Your testing process can be a problem area during the upgrades, and we'll talk about that in the next part of the presentation. But if you test it well, hopefully you won't have too many showstoppers on the first day where you've got to do emergency transports and things like that. And you can make your adjustments to security as needed. So how can Authorization Architect help, you ask? I'm glad you asked that. First off, what is AA? It's a product that helps design SAP security roles. They're based on least privilege, which is a big concept in security, not always followed, but it means you only get the access of what you really need. We review the roles in this tool. We review them for SOD prior to creation. There's an automatic, semi-automated role build process. It will address the transaction changes due to S/4HANA simplification, and this is a huge time saver. It will address unused transactions in security roles and show them what the users are not using. And it offers a more complete and stress-free testing experience, so you should have much better test results. And we'll go into that in more detail. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the process flow today, but if you're interested, just talk with our salespeople, and we'd be happy to do a demo of the tool for you and go through the process flow. I'm going to go over some of the major features now. The first is automated data analysis. Authorization Architect uses our transaction archive tool. TA piggybacks on SAP, and SAP has a number of places where it stores transactional data on execution, such as in transaction ST03. But the problem is SAP starts to summarize that data after the first, week or 10 days. And after a month or so, you're getting more and more high-level summaries, and it doesn't do you much good. With TA, ideally, you get that up and running as soon as you can. If you're an existing customer, you may already have it, and you start capturing that data while you're ramping up for the rest of the project. Ideally, you'd get 13 months or at least cover the January, February period or your year-end period so that you've got year-end once a year activity captured. AA uses the TA runtime license, so you don't have to get that separately. It's very fast, often just in seconds. It's faster and more flexible than using the SAP audit log, where you may have to look up users individually to see what they have executed. and it eliminates the manual consolidation that would be involved in doing that. This is a page from Authorization Architect where it's using the TA data, and it looks very busy, but it's actually very simple once you get looking at it. Where's my cursor? Up at the top here, we see that we're looking at what's going to be a role for U.S. sales assistant, and we've got some users, 3, that we've mapped to this future role. These are 3 people that already work in that department, and they do the work that's associated with this role. And we feel like they're representative of the department. Now, you could put in 10 people here, you could put it in 20, but for our demo here, we've got 3 put in. And so this is going to show you all of the transactions that they have executed, these 3 people. So the transactions are listed down. The description, plain English, is listed here. And then how many times those transactions have been executed and by how many users. So 7 people here, or 7 times this has been executed by 3 users, means 100% of your users, 3 out of 3, 100% of your users have executed that. Whereas some of these others, we've only got 1 user out of 3. So depending on how many users you've got in here, you might have 4 or 5. If you've got a bunch of transactions that are either 0 or 25%, you would question whether you really need those transactions in the role, or could they be in an emergency access role? You would think through that. For 67% or 75 or 100, you probably want those in the role. So this would tell you what the usage is by the users in that group right now. It'll also tell you whether these transactions are maintained or display, depending on how you've got them coded in the system. The tool is going to create 1 composite role for each position. So sales assistant is going to have 1 composite role, and within that composite, you're going to have 1 maintain role and 1 display role, as well as a role that all SAP users get that's got print functionality and SAP Office and stuff. Another feature is provisioning for migrations. So if you're moving from one version of SAP to a higher version, in the configuration, you're going to tell the tool what version you're currently on and what version you're moving to. If there's a replacement transaction available for that transaction, it's going to tell you. And so in this example, we're talking as if we're moving to S/4HANA. XD01 that we're currently using, that doesn't exist in S/4HANA. Instead, the tool suggests that you use the BP transaction. And then 01 does exist, no change. So it's going to tell you. This saves you an enormous amount of time, because to find these otherwise, SAP has them documented in a simplification guide, and that simplification guide is like 1,000 pages long. And even within there, it references you to get more information, look up this OSS note. So it's a lot of work going through your transactions and finding out what's been impacted, what hasn't. This is going to save you that effort. So going back to our previous screen here, if we look over here on the right where it says swap transaction, you just barely see it on the right. Well, these are grayed out because these transactions are good, but if a new transaction was recommended, this is where it would tell you. And so, I'm trying to find my cursor, you would click on this for one of these lines, it would tell you the transaction that's recommended, and then you can replace that transaction, you can add it in addition to what's already in there, or you can just ignore the new transaction. Okay. Next, the tool has got integrated segregation of duties analysis. it will do a virtual SOD analysis on the role proposal before you've actually created a role. After you've input what transactions you want in the role based on the screen we looked at, where you may have added some transactions and you may have deleted some from that list, a role proposal will come up, which will look almost identical to SAP's PFCG screen, but actually the role has not been built yet. And you can review the proposal. You can, if you've got special areas you want to look at, make sure there's no basis stuff in the role that doesn't belong there, or nothing else that you deem critical. You can look at it. You can, if you want to inactivate something, you can. If there's something you want to add, you can. Then you can save that virtual role there and run an SOD analysis on it. And it will tell you, okay, for this maintain role, you've got the following high conflict SODs, and you've got, you know, a couple medium or a couple lows. And then you can look at those. You can decide, you know, the transactions you want to take out of the role. Do you want to try to handle it right now, or do you want to accept the risk? You can do all of that as a security person, and with input from the business, you can do that before the role is actually created. Actually, after you've done the SOD analysis, you can send a role via workflow to a role approver. He can see the detail of the SOD. He can see the transactions that are in there. He can actually look at the detail of the role online if you would like to. And then he can either bounce it back to you and say, hey, you need to get rid of this risk by doing this, or do something else, or he can approve the role for creation. You can also see the org levels associated with the role. The role operator will approve it for the role creation. We also have another thing called a role owner who will approve the deployment in production. And the role operator up here is actually the security person. So I was on the wrong line when I talked about that. You got role owners and then approvers to move to production. And this is the screen where they can approve, return it, go look at the role details. And how are we doing? Okay. After that, the tool will automatically build the role for you. It defines the long role name and the role description. It names it according to the parameters that you put in the configuration. Builds a structured role menu for the users to make it easier for them to find their transactions. It'll define the role organization levels automatically based on the master data that you put into the system during configuration. And it goes beyond just SU24 recommendations on building the roles. It also looks at what the users currently have. And so as it's building the role, if SU24 says, you know, this user in accounts payable needs the S program object, but today they're getting by without that, but SU24 recommended it. Well, you can see that, and what the point I was going to try to make is that the tool will see that and will say, hey, they don't have that today. I'm not going to give it to them. And it will inactivate that object. And then later during testing, if you find out that you actually needed it, it's right there for you. You can go back and activate it. But it's got a number of levels of logic that it uses in building these roles. It'll build master and derived roles if you use derived roles. And it'll build standalone, maintain, display, and then composite roles containing the other two. One of the final features I wanted to mention is the semi-automated testing. And this is a really cool feature. Ideally, you would run this in production, but you may run it some in QA as well. You may, if you have to do that to satisfy your change management people. But basically, it removes a lot of the risk from testing. As I said, the logic that goes into building the roles, if the user doesn't, the user's on the list that's being evaluated, if they don't already have access to something, it's going to inactivate that access. So the tool is built to not give them more than what the representative users already have. So it should be safe to test in production. Now, what it does is in production, the roles are actually built in development. This tool runs in production, but it has an RFC back to development. The roles are created in development. You can do some testing in QA, but not necessarily the in-depth testing you would have done before, and then deploy it to production. In production, you select the users who are going to validate the roles. They will still have their old access, but they will also have access to the new roles, the new display and maintain roles. When what they do rather than testing really is they do their normal work. So if I'm an accounts payable clerk and I'm processing invoices, I would process invoices. And the security checks, the way they're going to work is they're going to look at the new role first. And if they have enough access in the new role, they will flag that as a pass, and I will be able to do my job, get my work done, and it just passed. Now, if I'm doing something and it fails on the security check of the new role, it's going to fall back to my current access. And if I have it in my current access, it's going to let me proceed. But it's going to take note of that. The trace log is going to pick that up. And then after a day or a week, whatever your period is, you can go back to development and revise the new roles, transport them up to production, and do a new cycle. And you should have less the second time. And within, a week, you probably have got most of the stuff ironed out, most of the stuff that's daily. The beauty of this is that people, when they encounter a problem, they're able to keep working and keep processing. A big problem with testing as it's done now in QA is that it's test and fail. I'm a tester, I test it, I fail, I give an SU53 to security, then I have to wait for them to fix it. Maybe I test a few other test cases, and so I've got 5 or 6, and I've reached failures in each one of those. And then finally I give up. I've got a real job to do. I go back to my day job. And the next time, even when the security is ready to test, I'm not that eager to go back and test it. Maybe I don't test it as thoroughly. And so the result is testing runs long, it's incomplete, and you have problems when you do your migration to production. This facility will give a much smoother migration. And just other features, I mentioned the semi-automated testing in its own slide. There is functionality built in to make traces easier to read and self-explanatory. Functionality to help you get your SU24 up to snuff before the project starts. There's comprehensive audit reports on everything that's being done in the tool. Recently, the team added a more flexible role naming convention. And when you get up to deployment and you're rolling out these roles to various groups, we've got a deployment dashboard which will tell you where you stand. And I'd add that more Fiori functionality is coming, hopefully somewhere around the end of the year, but in the very near future, there will be more Fiori functionality as well. So the summary, I think I'm just going to leave this up and take any questions if you have them at this time, since we're running short on time. Stephanie, are you there?
Yes. Thank you so much, Alan, for your presentation.
Sure.
And we just have a few announcements. If you have any questions, please add them now into the question box. And while we wait for those to come in, we just have a couple announcements. Alan, could you go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, if you book a meeting with us and email events@pathlock.com before January 31st and mention that you attended this session at the innovation series, you will win a $25 Starbucks virtual card. So we encourage you to email events@pathlock.com with the session you attended, and we'll send you a Starbucks gift card. And then with that, I'm not seeing any questions. So we just wanted to say thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you at future events.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Stephanie.